The United States of America is at war with Iran, and that means that every business in the world is stalling because of this. In this episode, I discuss how American policy influences other countries, and I'm mainly focusing on Africa and focusing particularly on Uganda and its HIV response. I'm particularly case studying HIV because it is my area of interest and it is the area where I work every day. So I have to discuss something I'm well conversant with. I have been working closely with people infected and affected with HIV. I work for an organization called He Intends Victory, which is a Christian ministry for those infected and affected. And I have served in different capacities in that organization. I have been a peer educator. I have been a youth director. I have volunteered at some extent in different HIV-related projects, and I'm also serving right now as a country director of the same organization. So I am well versed and experienced in terms of knowledge and exposure when it comes to HIV-related things. And one of the things that I have largely participated in is adherence. We have done projects that encourage adherence, people taking their pills and being faithful to their medication every day so that they can have a long-lasting life and have healthy bodies and also be able to pursue their dreams. But one of the questions that I normally had frequently as we talked about adherence or as we had programs about adherence, I often ask myself, where do these medications come from? And recently, with the coming in of President Trump and the cutting of aid to USAID, the disruption it caused showed that people taking medication is not just about taking the pill. Adherence is a much wider thing. It is geopolitics. It is bargaining. It is a lot of things, and all of this stem from the United States of America. And in this episode, I would like to go beyond and dissect how how US policy is affecting HIV fight in Africa. For starters, United States has a fund or a program called PEPFAR. And PEPFAR stands for the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. Go with me here because I have done some research for this particular episode. And as you can see, I'm going to give you facts. So, the United States of America has a fund called PEPFAR, which stands for President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. And this fund was started in 2003 under President George Bush. This is the largest global program in history that is focused on both things like HIV and AIDS. And this fund is mainly to fund treatment, testing, prevention programs, and health worker trainings, plus lab systems. This program is mainly funded by US taxpayers' money, and it is approved by the US Congress, and it works through partnerships with other countries like Ministry of Health and the NGOs, which I will not be able to mention here. Uganda is one of the countries that benefit largely from this program. And in Uganda, they've worked with Ministry of Health and other NGOs that I will not mention here. In other words, in short, if you would like to say, PEPFAR helps keep many people alive, people that are on ARVs or antiretroviral medication. People that are on those medications are kept alive by PEPFAR. But how does the US policy come in? This is how US policy comes in later on to influence AIDS response in Africa. Like I said, the PEPFAR is a fund that is funded by the US taxpayers' money. And before I go any further, allow me say this first. Thank you to the US and thank you to the people of America for this contribution. Later on, you'll understand me why I have to say that. But continuing, this is a fund that is a program in the United States. So this means that it goes through this generic system of coming up as a policy in the government. That means that it has to be discussed. And in this case, it is discussed by the US Congress. And US Congress is made up of two chambers. We have the House of Representatives and we have the Senate. So these people sit in their chambers or in meetings, what you would call parliament. Let me use parliament for the benefit of our Ugandan audience. For better understanding of what I'm talking about, picture this as a parliament. So the parliament sits, but in this case, there are two parliaments that sit. So the parliament sits and they propose a bill, and the bill in this case is PEPFAR. If PEPFAR should continue or if PEPFAR should even increase the amount of aid that it gives to African countries or other people that need the HIV response. So the bill is proposed and the houses vote on it. So House of Representatives votes, and when when it's done voting, then the Senate also votes. If both houses pass the bill, then the President of America signs it. When he signs it, then everything is good. But should the Congress not approve of this fund, that means that the programs will have to expire. That means the budget shrinks or even disappears, and political conditions may be added to this. In other words, the PEPFAR fund is not automatic. It goes through constant reevaluation and constant reauthorization by different people to make it a policy. And this is where the politics comes in. How does aid politics work? You have to understand that aid, or any aid that you've heard about coming into Uganda, you have to understand that this is not just help. However, this aid involves a lot of things. First of all, there is strategic interests. For instance, if aid is coming into America, understand that there is some need to influence in Africa, or there is a reason, or there is an interest that these guys want. There is also, it involves diplomatic relationships, and these can change any time, as we have seen in previous times. Diplomatic relations change, and they can change depending on any subject. We have moral positioning, and now this is broad because it can encompass a lot of things. If you want to understand, I will throw you back to a recent time when LGBTQ became a thing here, and the government rejected people that engage in that kind of activity, and the repercussion that came after the government pronounced its position on LGBTQ issues. So there is that moral positioning. It also determines whether a country should receive this kind of aid or not. There's also domestic US political debates. These influence a lot, because if you remember, in the ever since President Trump came back again as a president of the United States, a lot of things have changed, and one of the things that changed was the immediate cut of aid to USAID, and you all remember the havoc that resulted from that. You remember that a lot of people were laid off work. ARV supply chain was disrupted. A lot of people struggled. I don't know if we felt it much in Uganda, but I was recently in Zimbabwe, and this was quite a thing that was caused there, because a lot of people were off their medication during that time in Zimbabwe. So it was very difficult. So US domestic policy does affect how aid works in Uganda, or if any country should receive the aid. So I will later on expound on this topic. Cultural disagreements. Cultural disagreements do come in play a lot in terms of especially when aid is going to come. There is AIDS and aid, so please go with me here. So when aid is going to come, there is a lot of things that are very considered. So for example, a country's position on abortion, a country's position on LGBTQ issues, a country's position on human rights, corruption, does work in play to determine whether aid should come in the country. How does then this connect to Uganda? Because all of this is happening in the US. How does it connect back to Uganda? Like I said, PEPFAR is responsible for a lot of things that happen in the country, especially in HIV response. It pays for treatment, it pays for lab, it pays for the health workers, it pays for viral load monitoring, it pays for so much. First of all, Uganda relies heavily on PEPFAR for most of its things. ARV supply chain is dependent on that. So if PEPFAR goes away, that means that adherence levels will drop. That means that a lot of people will go off their medication. That means that the clinics will not have the medication. That means that the people that have been taking medication and that have been getting medication for 6 months, let's say, there are people that go to the hospital only twice a year, and they go there to only pick their medication, and they can pick medication of up to 6 months. If PEPFAR stops funding, then we go back to monthly. So that means that people are walking long distances to go to the hospital. So this kind of discourages adherence, because now it increases the patient burden, or it increases anxiety on the patient, because now the patient has to move long distances every month to pick the medication. The patient has to struggle. There is a bit of struggle, and if we are trying to chase an AIDS-free generation by 2030, that means that this kind of stalls that progress. So PEPFAR is very important because now it's supporting that ARV supply chain. And then lab testing, it also supports lab testing. So if it goes away, that means that things like those testing kits, we cannot get them. So people will never know if they carry the virus or not, because there is no way they will be going to the hospital to test. Then viral load monitoring. This is very important because I don't know if you guys have heard about U equals U, which is undetectable means untransmittable. So the U equals U comes about if somebody has been diagnosed with HIV and they start their medication and they be faithful on this medication. That means taking it at the proper time they're supposed to take it without missing. They reach a moment where the virus is suppressed. By virus, I mean, you see, upon going to the hospital for medical checkup or for HIV testing, they will test your blood and tell you that you have HIV. I'm just assuming. You go to the hospital, you test, they will tell you that you have HIV. But what that blood also tells them is the amount of HIV virus that is in your blood, and this is what they use to determine which kind of medication you're going to have. Some people might have like 1 million copies of HIV in their blood, so they will get a certain drug, and others might have like 500,000 copies of HIV in their blood, and they will get a different type of medication. So it doesn't mean that every person who is living on HIV is taking the same medication. So these medication help to reduce those blood. So if you went to the hospital with 1 million copies of HIV virus in your blood, and then you begin to take this medication faithfully, this medication works in such a way that it reduces this virus in the body. So there is a time you come to a point where you have like 5,000 copies of HIV in your blood, and when you go to test, or when you test yourself using these testing kits, it is very likely that your virus might not be seen. There is a similar case that happened recently in Uganda, where of Tasso versus a certain guy. You should read about it. These things can be explained in that case. So you go to the hospital after that, and then you can be tested, and you're almost and the virus cannot be detected. But it doesn't mean that it has gone away. But because of your proper adherence to the medication has rendered the virus inactive to reproduce, so making it weak and unseen in your blood. So this is what we call suppression or viral suppression. So this sort of thing is not done by any hospital. It is done in very specified hospitals where they can monitor the impact of the medication on the human body, and also the impact of the medication in the fight against HIV. So these sort of things cannot be done without PEPFAR. Also, there is community adherence programs that PEPFAR pays for. You've seen a lot of people doing sensitization campaigns on HIV and AIDS on the streets. I know a lot of my friends who do that kind of work. So these things cannot happen without the PEPFAR coming through. And health workers' salaries and facilities. PEPFAR has gone ahead as pay some key individuals in organizations. So it becomes very important in the fight against HIV. You cannot rule it out. How does this then become a thing that should concern us? The State of Union address that happens in America every year is what you would call maybe the State of the Nation address that the president here normally does, so where he speaks in Parliament, speaks to the Congress, or speaks to people in power who are in attendance, but he's largely speaking to everybody of us. So in this State of Address recently, you heard that ever since the President Trump came into power, he's been focusing mainly on making America for the Americans first. He came with that policy of America for the Americans first, and he introduced a lot of policies that have kicked back on anything that does not make America for Americans first. And some of those things was the was the fight on the immigration, where he had people sent back to their countries, and also introducing visa bonds in countries like Uganda, where you have to sort of deposit money in order to go. So those kind of systems, when they begin to come into play, that is when we have to worry for ourselves as Africans or as Ugandans, because that means that everything that is being decided has to first depend on American environment and making Americans first. So that means that there will be constant debates, there will be funding delays, there will be procurement delays, there will be clinic stock pressure, there will be patient anxiety, there will be adherence risk, and a spike in HIV infection. And I'm just outlining these points, but I can go deeper and tell you that if a policy, because HIV response is supposed to be continuous, so if policies change and now there is long debates, that means that there is long decision making. That means that long decision making result into delays in supply chain. There is a delay in stocking up clinics. There is a delay in patients getting the medication. And guess what? This makes everybody lose the fight against HIV and leading to an HIV spike. So, however, I'm not trying to say that as Ugandans we mainly rely on US aid or on foreign aid to care for our own people, or that we are dependent. However, I'm just saying that Uganda built part of its HIV response. Uganda and Africa at large built part of its HIV response architecture with foreign funding integrated into it. And this creates a structural dependency, not because Uganda is incapable or Africa is incapable, but because global health financing was designed that way. So when there is a hiccup, when there is a change in policy, when there is anything that affects that policy, we will all feel it, because that is how the nature is. However, why does Africa rely heavily on foreign aid, or why is Africa foreign aid dependent? Unfortunately, I cannot condense everything in this video. However, I will put up a second video in response, or a part 2 of this particular one, trying to explain some of the things that I cannot fit in here. However, I also do have a written article about the same topic that I'm discussing here, the same subject matter that I'm discussing in here, and you'll be able to find it on my website, whose link is in the description below. I'll go through these points very fast as to why Africa is dependent on foreign aid. First of all, it is the colonial economic design. Do you remember in the colonial times, the economy was built around exporting raw material to foreign countries and then importing finished products? So that in such a way made us dependent to them, that we do not have the capacity to produce. I think we have some kind of brainwash where we think that we have to give the raw materials and then we buy back the finished product. So that is a system that we inherited, but I'll expound more on this in the coming episode. Secondly, we have donor-driven health. Over years, donors have come into Africa, or they have come into Uganda and invested huge sums of dollars in order to help fight things like epidemics, HIV, tuberculosis, malaria, and they've put a lot of this money, and we have used this money to purchase medication or everything we need in response to the epidemics or whatever sickness that is happening at that particular time. So that kind of built a dependency. And then we have media storytelling problems, where Africa is being publicized as a certain place. Again, we will expound on this in the coming episode. And then we also have pharmaceutical economics, which is very broad topic itself, but we'll also expound on it in the coming episode. The other question that I would like to just point on before I conclude this episode is, what happens if Africa built its own ARVs manufacturing system? this again is a topic for the next episode, but I will just point out to you in a little bit. First of all, it will improve the treatment security, because now the dependency will go away and people will be able to know that for sure there is medication for us to stay alive, and that medication is right here in our country. So there will be that kind of security for a moment, and then it will lead to economic transformation, because where we needed aid for ARVs, we probably not go into that. Like if you've been following from the beginning of the episode, aid is not exactly just help. In order to receive, you must give up something or you must expend something. So we would not be going into that kind of negotiation if we had those medication for ourselves. Then there is political independence. Yes, like I said, aid is not exactly just help. Sometimes we go requesting it and nobody wants to be in a beggar position. But anyhow, so us having our own ARVs manufacturing factories, that would really help us gain political independence. But again, I'll have to expound this in the next episode. Also, the last very one is the regional pharmaceutical hubs, which if we have like South Africa producing, Uganda producing, then in the end we have enough ARVs for our people and we can take care of them. But again, I'll expound on this in the coming episode. But in conclusion, I would like to tell you this: adherence, or the HIV-free generation cannot be built without adherence. And adherence is not just swallowing medicine or taking a pill. It is more. It is surviving geopolitics. It is going through the maneuvers. So there is a lot of things that happen in the background that we do not come to understand. There are things that the government does, especially now the government of Uganda, in the regime of President Museveni. This is not a political thing. This is not to throw light to the president, but we have to give credit where credit is due. We have to give it to him that the HIV response in the country has been very, very clearly seen during his reign. And we do not know what that means as regular Ugandans. There is a lot of things that happen backdoor. There's a lot of things that happen, the negotiations that we never understand. All we see is that the medication is in the hospital, and that when a certain time comes, we just go to the hospital and get those medication, but we do not know how they got there. So some of these things, I can talk about them, but frankly, I am an outsider, and I'm basically a student that is just doing research and then making this podcast. That is very good of you to stay up to now listening to this guy rant about stuff. This is going to be an educational platform where we talk about socio-economic issues affecting Uganda and Africa at large. I don't want to say that I'm not going to be political, because most of these things are quite political, but we're not here to attack anybody. We're not here to point fingers, but we're just here to be as neutral as possible in understanding and dissecting the things that sell first the things that sell our country, the things that promote our country, and the things that, because I realize that a lot of people like to argue online about things that they do not understand. I love arguments myself, but I like to argue from an educated point of view. And before I address something to begin arguing about, I like to understand. So I take chance to read. I take time to make myself knowledgeable before I can come into an argument. And right here is a sport where you can expect non-partisan analysis on things and education to begin with. So if you have different views or issues that you want to put forward, the comment section is open, and I'm always open to anything that is beyond. I'm always open to your kind of opinion. Otherwise, I sign out. Bye bye. See you in the next episode.